In February of 303, the Emperor Diocletian opened the last and worst persecution Rome ever aimed at the Church. His first edict didn't order executions. It ordered books, churches pulled down, scriptures handed over, and burned. Across Roman North Africa, officials came to church doors for the writings of the Christians' God. Some clergy refused and died for it. Some handed the books over. Afterward, the African churches had a name for the ones who'd complied, the handers over, and what to do with those men would split African Christianity for centuries, put a church quarrel in front of a Christian emperor for the first time, and force the church to say what makes a church the church. The break came at Carthage, where around 311 the archdeacon Caecilian was made bishop. Quickly, before the bishops of neighboring Numidia could arrive, and one of the men who laid hands on him, Felix of Aptungi, was said to have handed over the books to much of Africa that voided everything. Holy things don't come through a traitor's hands. 70 Numidian bishops declared the seat empty and raised up a rival, Majorinus. When he died soon after, Donatus took his place, led the movement for more than 30 years, and gave it his name. Soon, nearly every African town had two churches, altar against altar, as their enemy Optatus put it. Behind them stood African tradition. Cyprian, Carthage's own martyr bishop, had taught that baptism outside the true church was no baptism. The church, they said, is the spotless bride of Christ. A minister who betrayed him is cut off from her, and the sacraments, the physical gifts Christ handed his church, baptism above all, die in his hands. Converts from the other side, they baptized again. Then the empire changed sides. Constantine took Rome in 312 after ordering a Christian sign marked on his soldiers' shields, and the Donatists wrote to him first, asking for judges from Gaul, where the persecution had barely reached. Christians had gone to an emperor once before. 40 years earlier, the church at Antioch had asked the pagan Aurelian to settle who owned its building, but nobody had ever handed a Christian emperor a quarrel about what the church itself was. They lost every round. A council at Rome under Miltiades, its bishop, ruled for Caecilian in 313. A larger one at Arles did the same in 314, adding that an ordination doesn't come undone because the man who performed it proves unworthy. An imperial inquiry found the charge against Felix false. The transcript survives. And in 316, Constantine heard the last appeal himself and ruled the same way. The confiscation order came at the end of 316 and the soldiers in March 317, and in the violence Donatists died, and entered Donatist memory as martyrs. The confiscations gave a movement born under persecution a persecution of its own, and it grew. Within 4 years, Constantine gave up, leaving the Donatists, as he put it, to the judgment of God. By mid-century, they may have been Africa's majority church. Imperial officers came in 347 with money and orders to bring them back in. Optatus records Donatus's answer. What has the emperor to do with the church? Reunion came at sword point, and Donatus died in exile. When the emperor Julian let the exiles home in 362, his church came back stronger. It had a violent rural fringe. The Circumcellions, who carried clubs, were feared by landlords and creditors, and were accused by hostile sources of courting death. Nearly every detailed description of them was written by their enemies, and Donatist bishops sometimes disowned them, so where the truth ends and the caricature begins is hard to say. The split was nearly a century old when Augustine became Bishop of Hippo in 395, and his answer went to the root. The church in this world, he argued, isn't a society of the pure. Wheat and weeds grow together in God's field until the harvest. And a minister's sin can't spoil a sacrament because the sacrament was never his to give. The decisive blow came as an imperial hearing in 411 when the two churches met in the baths of Carthage, 286 bishops for the Catholic side, the church of the wider world, and about 285 for the Donatist, the imperial commissioner Marcellinus presiding. Augustine argued the Catholic case. Marcellinus ruled against the Donatists, and this time the empire didn't walk away. Assemblies banned, lay people fined, churches confiscated, clergy exiled. Augustine defended it, though he had once held that no one should be forced in matters of faith. Then he watched Donatist towns come, under the pressure of the laws, into what he judged sincere Catholic communion, and he changed his mind. His warrant was a line from Jesus' parable of the banquet. Compel them to come in. He pressed the courts to stop short of killing, but he accepted the state's coercion of fellow baptized Christians. The Donatists outlived him. The organized schism is traceable to 430, when Augustine died with Vandals outside the walls of Hippo. After that, it all but vanishes from view. Gregory the Great was still using the name in the 590s, nearly 300 years after the officials came for the books, though whether he meant a surviving Donatist church or a discipline problem inside his own is disputed. Underneath all of it sat a question. If the minister who baptized you turned out to be a fraud, was your baptism real? The Donatists said no. The answer Augustine defended and sharpened became the Church's settled answer. And Catholics, the Orthodox and the historic Protestant confessions, hold it still. He preached that when Peter baptizes, it is Christ who baptizes. And when Judas baptizes, it is Christ who baptizes. The record has a second half, though. The side that was right about the sacrament imposed it with the empire's sword, on the grandchildren of people who had faced that sword, rather than hand over a book, and it was the losing side that had asked what an emperor was doing in a church quarrel at all. Every Sunday, in congregations that have never heard the name Donatus, a sinner's hands break the bread, and whenever the church baptizes, a sinner's hands pour the water. Nobody in the room asks whether the hands are worthy. Africa spent 3 centuries settling that.